Hi there, Barry Eaton here, and welcome to Radio Out There. It's time for part 2 of Duncan Rhodes, the editor and publisher of Nexus magazine. Duncan, how are you?
Good morning. It just feels like about a week ago since we spoke.
Funny about that. Funny. I'll tell you what's in a week? They say a week can change politics. I don't know about you, but I had yesterday the worst day. Everything virtually went wrong. I spent hours trying to correct stupid things. Do you ever have days like that?
Yes. Look, I think everybody has days when things just don't go right. And I've actually, there's no articles about that in this issue of the magazine, but allow me to digress just a bit. I have noticed this, and I've often wondered if it's astrological, meteorological, some form of soul karma and group souls working together. But recently, I was listening to some research from a guy called Paul Stonehill, who's got a fantastic YouTube channel, and I highly commend you get him on as often as possible. He's got hundreds and hundreds of YouTube clips ranging from 15 minutes to 45 minutes, and he's probably the gold mine of information about everything to do with the paranormal, UFOs, anomalous ancient civilizations from Russia, from ancient Russia, all the stans, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. He has got so much information about what went on. He's had access to paranormal stuff that was sort of semi-released. And one, in the midst of all this, was a particular Soviet-era commander. He rose to the level of being in charge of regional Air Force bases. And I believe he came from a ethnic background as opposed to sort of the white Russian background. But that doesn't matter in the Soviet era. Everyone was sort of given equal status, believe it or not. And but he had that sort of connection to the more unconventional side of Russian society. I mean, he was from the country and from the fringe rather than from the cities and from family bureaucracies. So he always had a bit of a different view of life. But anyway, to get to my point, he noted and figured out that on some days, you shouldn't really go out and do anything too out there, out of the ordinary. You should basically stay home and meditate or just do small things. And he noted that he applied this to being in charge of the airfield. And there was a combination of solar, meteorological, which some people could sort of shove together as astrological, I don't know. And he also listened to what the Siberian shaman told him and their attitudes. So he was in charge of a military airfield, and in Soviet regional military airfields, there'd be a acceptable level of aircraft crashes and subsequent deaths or injuries of pilots. And it was something like 10 crashes, etc., every 6 months or something. I mean, it wasn't over the top. But anyway, he sort of thought this was a bit of a waste and figured that he would apply his understanding. And so on some days, he would not allow anybody to fly a plane anywhere. And in his 3-year tenureship, the first time there, he didn't lose a single aircraft or pilot. And which is astonishing, considering it absolutely abolished the normal thing. Anyway, he got replaced. He got posted somewhere else on some other duty, and the person who replaced him went back to the normal thing, and it went back to the normal number of crashes and deaths. And he was restationed there, I believe, the second time, and he applied his stuff. And again, the deaths and crashes went down to zero. So there is definitely an argument to be said for the idea that there is an outside influence or outside influences which conspire together and suggest you just should not go doing anything major, especially if it involves machinery and lots of diverse factors and variables. The more variables you've got, the more you're able to reduce those variables to impact on what you're doing on those particular days. the better. So it's a real phenomenon, and somebody up there has figured out some aspect of it enough to, save a lot of lives and equipment. So it's
Well, after yesterday, my partner Anne said, "Why don't you have a look and see what is in your astrology?" So we did, and we found out that the sun had a very conflicting angle to the planet Uranus in my chart, and I looked it up, and it was a day of disaster. So there you go. And
yeah.
it started off, we had huge storm here where I was yesterday. The streets were flooded, all sorts of things. Then all the other drama followed on, and it was to do with machinery because I had computer and TV problems and all sorts of stuff like that, real problems. So it was just frustration after frustration. Now the sun has moved on, and I'm starting to recover and get myself together. So there is an astrological. So I'm sure it's not only astrology, there must be other factors to take into account here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I know from studying biorhythms, which were big in the 70s and even a
Yes.
little bit into the 80s, there's no doubt on individual charts, there's no doubt that biorhythms are something, to be factored in. I know high-profile legal firms in America used to factor in biorhythms and astrological charts of not only their client, but the one they were against. World War II, both sides of World War II, the Germans and the British Allies employed astrologers, and it's a known fact that several dates for invasions and other key things were picked solely, and in a couple of cases, a couple of people, generals, were selected based on their astrological chart.
Yeah,
But getting back to this Russian guy, there's no evidence whatsoever that he looked at the individual biorhythms or astrology charts of individual pilots. It was something to do with the sun and solar flares and a few other things which impacted everything to do with engines and anything to do with moving through the air. So whether or not they picked up on atmospheric water currents or air currents, or I don't know, but he certainly, proved his point. Yeah.
So basically what we're saying is it's not a coincidence. I'm not into coincidences. So there is an explanation or a potential explanation.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's all relevant. I mean, coincidences. Yeah, I mean, the human brain it just comes down to the human brain's desire to label things. I mean, at the end of the day, we've got masses of sensory input coming in through our skin, nose, eyes, and ears, and our brain basically spends all its time decoding that data and then analysing it, and then your beliefs of what goes into interpretation of the data. So, yeah, I mean, who knows?
There's a very interesting story in the current edition of Nexus, and it's about the headline on the front page is Information as Energy. So basically that's what you're talking about there. And everything we know is energy. We are energy. Our soul is energy. Everything around us. But it's a very interesting article that's in the, and it says the universe, a computer, the human body, the environment, businesses, all living systems are information carriers, receptors, and or transmitters. Now, I never thought of that before, but it makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, even energy is information, really. I mean, I think you could. I mean, this is the third article in a series of 3 that we've done about the subject of information from different perspectives. The first 2 articles, I don't know that we really covered them in depth, but I can recap the points. The main points of them is that information. I mean, basically, if you were a Puritan, you would say everything is information. Matter and energy is information. Actions and events are information. I mean, we live in a universe which is considered space and time as the 2 main. Some people call them props. Some people call them parameters. When you have something which takes up space, we call it an object or a thing. And when something takes up time, we call it an event. So all events are, I mean, an event to time is the same as an object is to space. I mean, it's got its own reality and validity, and some form of intelligence has, in my opinion, manifested or co-created it or has perceived it via its information sensors. Now, the first two articles we did, some people may recall them. The first one picked up on some of the experiments of Gary Ayov, where the Russians in the 60s and 70s had basically realised that everything has an information frequency. Okay, so
That makes sense.
yeah, like the species of ducks as a whole species have an information frequency, and just say for this conversation we call it the duck frequency. The same with chickens. Now, subspecies of ducks like mallards and other ones, they have their own information frequency, and call it mallard information frequency. Trees, young humans have an information frequency, young males have their own information frequency. Everything basically that you can perceive, which is interesting, you can derive an information frequency about it. Now, I don't profess to understand how the Russians determined this, but when they started using it in experiments, which we reported on in Nexus, for example, the first ones, they got a bunch of fertile duck eggs, and they exposed those duck eggs to the information frequency of chickens. And what emerged from those fertile eggs was a creature that was pretty much half chicken and half duck. Not every egg gave exactly the same creature, but most of them had characteristics of both things. And that's without any genetic or DNA manipulation. That is just exposing an information frequency of one species onto the information species of another. They did it with plants, and towards the end of the series of experiments that we reported on, it was noted that one of the elderly male scientists in his 60s or 70s, balding and crinkles, a bit like where I'm going, and he decided, well, light bulb moment, ding, ding, well, why don't I get the information frequency of young virile males and bathe myself in it? What will happen? So, he exposed himself to the frequency. This is an old man exposing himself to the information frequency of young virile men.
So what happened?
His hair started to grow back. He had more vitality and energy. Oh, yeah. And, I mean, this is a big thing. Now, just so people understand, that technology actually got released into the West from Russian indirect sources. And I also tracked the existence of that technology up to the top of the Mormons, the Mormon Church in America. Now, I actually believe the Mormons and the Scientologists are basically CIA intelligence operations. They've been hijacked at the top. At what point, I don't know. I think it would vary. And they now are basically assets of the intelligence community. And there's plenty of evidence for that. I won't go into it now. But there are a variety of machines that have been in use around Australia, America, and Europe. I saw them emerging in the late 80s. The first one I saw was called the Listen machine, which was an acronym for Life Information System 10. More modern ones are called Oberon. And basically, these types of machines somehow get your body energy frequencies into a computer database where they are matched to an existing database of information frequencies. And in their databases, in these machines, they've got the information frequency of every pesticide, every herb, every vitamin, every mineral, including the information frequency of the lack of minerals. So if you are incredibly zinc deficient, that's got its own information frequency as opposed to you've got normal levels of zinc. And so some of these machines, they put like hands over the ears and you hear, sounds, etc. So information frequencies are going into the body and they're being picked up and analysed. And eventually, depending on the skill of the operator of these machines, up will come a reading which basically says this person's ill health is all based about a particular unrecognised tooth infection, and from that everything else is emerging from there. So in other words, fix that tooth and all these other things will happen. Now that's just one example. In other cases, they can pick up very specific presence of parasites or bacteria or fungi. I love the cases where retired farmers who've got ongoing health issues for the last 20 years, their wife drags them along to one of these machines and they sit there, being a good boy. And the machine will say, oh, all your health problems are being caused by this particular agricultural chemical that was used in the 1960s and is now banned everywhere around the world. And farmers sit there going, holy crikey, yeah, I did use that for a few years and I got it all over my skin. And so in some cases, they'll hit the client with the antidote frequency and there'll be a loss of symptoms and a recovery. So that technology is being used.
While you're on that topic, just a moment. This morning I read a headline from overseas that it's just been found that breakfast cereals in the US contain 80% of a fertilizer, many of them, 80%, and that fertilizer has an impact on fertility in males. How about that?
It's deliberate. They're trying to basically stop the human race from procreating at the rate we used to, and they're doing it through the food supply. So I mean, this is not the day and age to eat or consume any highly processed foods, especially from the big supermarket chains. God only knows what they're putting into those foods. So the more you can get out and get local foods, the better. Now the other article which we published leading up to this one continues the same vein, and it highlighted experiments where you didn't even use the information frequency in this particular range of experiments. So they got a glass jar of salamander spawn, which is like all the gooey eggs, unhatched, undeveloped, of salamanders, which are, everyone knows what a salamander is. And then they got a jar of frog spawn, which is all very gooey and sticky. And they put the two jars like a foot apart or whatever, 6 inches apart, and they got light. They shone light through the frog spawn onto the salamander spawn. And the salamander spawn all turned into frogs and vice versa. So that was just using light to push, when they shone light through the frog spawn onto the salamanders, that light was pushing genetic frequency information. So nothing physical was transferred from the frogs to the salamanders jar. They're both sealed, but the light pushed genetic information from this side into that side. And so other people, the experiments went further. They started experimenting, well, what happens if you get a photograph of a young virile version of yourself and shine light through it, if you can, onto yourself? Is that going to transfer information? And there is evidence for that. So, those experiments alone should tell people there's a lot more going on about your body and information frequencies than we've ever dreamed. And on the Russian side of the fence, they're using that in a medical setting. I don't know how widely accepted it is, because I know drug companies are big in parts of Russia. And, of course, on our side of the fence, on the Western mechanistic big pharma side, they don't want to know about it. But, but everybody, I'm sure, knows somebody who's a natural therapist with one of these machines or variations of machines. Now, this article, the third one in the series, is moving on from genetic and or physical, and this is talking about information on a larger scale, information being used by society, and there's many aspects of this, but in many ways, I guess it's fundamentally looking at the idea that as a steered society, it's not really saying that we're a controlled society. This article is basically pointing out we are a society where everything in it seems to be spiraling in a direction which we would call self-destruction or self-decay. And in some ways, I believe that there's a overriding force which is from top down in terms of hierarchical, not in terms of God and angels, but I'm talking about there's some humans or beings on the planet with a very long lifespan who contain and maintain a long agenda of things. And it's from that level projected down through their control of, entities like the WEF, the WHO, the United Nations, and then their control of your relevant governments and political parties, etc., all coming down. And it's like, yes, I'm sure there's aspects of agendas in there, like, we want a more multipolar planet where America is brought down from number one and these countries generically are brought up. and we reduced the population a bit. But everything that's sort of been put into place for at least the last 1,000 years has been done to the detriment of individual humans, detriment in terms of an outcome of a society where everything is vibrant, where everyone in society feels galvanized to improve society for everybody, where everyone trusts everybody instead of everyone distrusts everybody.
And hates.
Yeah, I mean, some people would say, oh, that's just dreaming about utopia. No, it's not. This is actual, and there's been more than one academic point this out, and we covered one other guy in Nexus who spoke at one of our conferences, whose name escapes me, very eccentric, but his whole purpose of life is to point out that everything we've done with art and most of the poetry, the stuff which has emerged into mainstream, has been what we would generally call destructive and self-destructive, but not at a rate where it triggers the alarms of the herd of humans. It's done at a gradual rate, and we're told by our trusted sources, oh, this is for your good, or the old favourite one, you know, we've got to break a few eggs to make an omelette. You know, the ends justify the means, which is the most dangerous justification for anything on the planet. If you know anybody in your life who even lives by that thing, just leave them, walk away. It is, to my mind, that whole thing epitomises the downward destructive thing. So this article, Society Through the Lens of Information, is looking at it, basically aspects of that and looking at how we can turn it around. But number one, before you can really tackle a thing, you need to know that it's there and where it's been and where you would like to take it to. And to satisfy yourself that, yeah, this whole thing needs a label. We've been in self-destruct mode for 1,000 years. I mean, yeah, we can blame, you know, beings and Illuminati and, you know, Vatican bankers and evil aliens or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's us humans which are maintaining it and perpetuating it. And we actually have the power, you know, and more humans are starting to realise that. And, you know, thanks to COVID and maybe just the timing of, Pluto entering Aquarius, is that right?
It's just there.
Maybe that, but there is, in my opinion, there is a gradual and but perceivable awakening going on across the planet, slowly, very slow in Australia. I mean, our media is so, we don't have access to alternative information. And
well, we do. You have to look for it, though.
But look, Sky News Australia is not alternative information. I mean, they're just, Nexus magazine, Nexus news feed. There's for a couple of free newspapers getting around. One's called The Light, and, you know, those sort of things. But it's still a slow slug here in Australia and New Zealand. But in Europe, Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia, all across Russia, South America, African countries, people are waking up, and it's like somebody's turned the light up a little bit in the background. People sort of look up from what they're doing and go, oh, you know, I've never noticed that before. But it's real. I've never noticed that before. And as more and more people go through this process, it's like their own internal light gets brighter, and that makes it brighter for everyone around them. So it's going to be an exponential awakening, in my opinion. But it started, I mean, people can say, oh, it started in the 70s and 80s.
No, it started right now, because Pluto and Aquarius, we are now in a total replay of the time of the French Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, and all of those when people woke up to all those control freaks out there, the French monarchy, all the others, and they revolted. And that's what's happening now. So people are going to wake up. It's going to be over the next 20 years.
But I need to point out, the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution were manufactured. They were not spontaneous uprisings of people. Spontaneous uprisings of people very rarely happen. They are organised. And
well, maybe the ones now are being organised.
The French Revolution was organised, and the winners wrote the history books. And it's the same. It was the same with communist Russia, the uprisings. Humans very rarely uprise unless they're given a motivation and instinct. Most humans want to have a nice, quiet, peaceful life. They don't want to go off and war and risk, I mean, there are some aberrations out there thanks to 200 years of being vaccinated with heavy metals and shit food. And there are people out there who are brain damaged and enjoy violence and enjoy inflicting violence. But fortunately, they're the minority. And yeah, just be very careful with the things. I mean, the
But does it
forces
really
that work
matter if
running this
somebody's...
planet, the forces that work running this planet are very aware of the astrological cycles, and many people out there who've done research will say they are so into ritual, so into ceremony, that it's. I mean, I accept that, but I waive it. But one of the big things they are into is they are into rituals, they are into ceremonies, and they are incredibly aware of the movement of stars and planets and their significance, and their timing of key events is always aligned with these things. So those bastards at the top who are steering the human herd, they are looking at Pluto coming into Aquarius and going, oh, right, we're going to get rid of one empire and we're going to create another. And that's all that's really happened in the last 1,000 or 2,000 years. So I'm hoping that the awakening that I'm talking about moves us past this, reflex action, and that we move more into being aware and taking responsibility of our actions, etc. But having said that, I'm still all in for a shift change. Let's see the old empire go and a new one form. But let's make sure when we form this new empire, it spins the other way, where everybody works towards trusting, everybody works towards looking after the whole instead of the individual, and we go on a growth and the legendary 1,000 years of peace and happiness. And let's hope we've got individual freedom at the same time. Sorry, there's a mosquito.
That's all right.
Attracted to my carbon dioxide.
All right, well, in our short time left, let's talk about a couple of the other stories in the current edition of Nexus, because there are quite a few stories that we were going to talk about. One of them, we talked about Big Pharma before, and the push for profit with childbirth, and that.
Oh yeah.
That's a bit. Well, I won't say scary, but very annoying.
Well, this is basically the stamp and the actions of Big Pharma, which has become emboldened and empowered over the last few decades. I mean, after they got rid of vaccine manufacturer liability for vaccine damage, they went from half a dozen or so childhood vaccinations up to 50 or 60 or 70. And it's like they opened the gates. They made drug companies immune to liability. And these days, when drug companies are sued, if it's over several billion, they just declare bankruptcy, Chapter 11 bankruptcy, to avoid fines and penalties and things. So unfortunately, the big drug companies have become much more powerful in the last 20 or 30 years, so much so that when you leave the CIA or any of those intelligence operations, you pretty much go and work for the agricultural chemical companies or the big drug companies. And after you've done a few years there, you're often appointed to become a regulator, a safety regulator of the very companies that you used to be members of. And we're seeing it all over the place. The guy who was in charge of the TGA in Australia, which is our pharmaceutical watchdog, Professor Skerritt, who I think should be arrested and jailed for his role in deceiving the Australian public into believing that the COVID vaccinations were safe or effective. He resigned, and he's now got a plum job with a drug company.
Funny about that.
Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, after she resigned to avoid all the scandals and the stuff, she's got a plum job with the WEF. And we're seeing this right across the Western world. All those who complied with the COVID cull have been promoted, and meanwhile, the excess death rates are still happening. And in Australia, the excess death rates are still running at 1 every 30 minutes, and that's above the 5-year average. And our Senate recently was asked to hold an inquiry into the excess deaths, and the Liberal, the Labor and the Greens all work together to kill the motion. So they know we're dying in droves, but they don't want any inquiries into it. And it's the same everywhere across the planet. Singapore, Malaysia, a few countries, they make noises about holding an inquiry, but
no. But look, right now
behind the scenes.
Right now with the WHO, they want to take control to be able to tell everybody, every country, this is a pandemic, this is what you do, we tell you, do as you're told, go away, and we'll organise everything. Now, that vote is happening very shortly, isn't it?
That's the WHO boat. Yes, they're basically saying, oh, COVID caught us by surprise, and we weren't really coordinated.
Oh,
Countries
yeah.
weren't coordinated with each other. We had different ideas about what you could do when you left your country and you came into a country. So the WHO has come up with this wonderful list of rules and regulations for the next pandemic, and they say in their docu advert, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of
Matter of
when. And
when.
this time we want total cooperation
Control.
across the board. Now, I reckon with the outset of COVID, everyone was in lockstep. But basically, what they've done is they've learned from COVID exactly, how many people are going to say no, what they're going to do, what the public's going to do. They've modelled everything. So when they release disease X, not only will they have all the gaps in the woodwork covered, but there will be global synchronization of regulations. So the WHO is basically saying this is a list of regulations. If we declare a pandemic, people have to get vaccinated. Contact tracing is going to go to a new level. If you're not vaccinated, you're going to be taken straight to quarantine camps and not even going to be allowed to stay at home. I mean, whatever the list of rules is, I haven't seen it, but it's going to be pretty draconian.
Pretty frightening.
And then each nation has to ratify their acceptance of the WHO list of obligations. And that's when the public have to go absolutely apeshit in every country and say, no, no, no. Now, we are not out of the woods. The Australian government is basically, this is the time of the millennia where the guys in control are literally on their last sequence of planned events. There's never going to be going back to anything that we used to have from their point of view. We're only moving forward. So there'll never be an accounting of the COVID cull, of 9/11 or, others going back decades. You can forget about those. The public are never going to uprise and take, drag politicians and doctors out of places and rip them limb from limb.
No guillotine then? No guillotine?
No, there'll be no guillotines. See, back in the French Revolution, somebody had to make all those extra guillotines in advance. There is so much evidence for it being a planned revolution.
But somebody has to plan from at some point, because people won't suddenly think all in concert with each other, oh yes, let's go and revolt. There has to be some person who starts the ball rolling, surely, or some organisation.
And it's not a member of the public. It's come down from up high. Yeah, there's a trigger event which is repeated in the media or the news or the town criers of the day, and that gets the public, which are already agitated, that tips them over the edge. And what they did with the French public was brilliant. They spent 2 or 3 years building the French people to a level of unhappiness, and it was deliberate. The top classes weren't doing it just because they were out of touch. They were doing it because they were being told to by whoever's further up the food chain. And all the ones that were guillotined from the so-called ruling class, they were meant to be guillotines. The ones that I would have guillotined are the ones that were nowhere to be found when the French people are running around as a mob, hanging anybody. It did get into a mob situation, and don't get me wrong, but the whole thing was planned, and the beginning into it was planned, and the coming out of it was planned, and then the history books were rewritten to make sure that it came across as a spontaneous mob uprising. In some ways, you could say what's going on across Europe with the farmers jumping on their tractors and driving to the things. You could say that's an uprising, but the worst they're doing is getting their machinery and they're squirting cow manure into the office windows of the Minister of Agriculture or Parliament houses, and that's, they're not ripping anybody from limb to limb. They're just angry. And in many cases,
you necessarily need people being ripped from limb to limb or having their head cut off. Surely people can uprise, people can revolt, people can put their point across without extreme violence.
Well, I'd like to think so too. And that most people inherently are not disposed to turning into a wild mob and ripping people from limb to limb. You need to be whipped up into it by your media. So if you see the mainstream media suddenly flip and they start reporting on the mass deaths, And then they start saying, well, the TGA needs to be held accountable. And, the AMA, the moment the media switches and tells the public that they've been duped, that the COVID vaccines were never safe and effective, and that the COVID vaccines are now considered responsible for excess death every 30 minutes, then you may have certain individuals of the public will go, well, I lost my wife, one kid and half my family to the COVID vaccines. I'm ropeable. I'm going to personally go and, have it out. And you'll see something on TikTok or Twitter and it'll be one person, going nuts. But you won't see them. I mean, our society is so fragmented with social media that the only way you're going to get a mob uprising is if it's organised through social media and their phones are broadcasting frequencies into their brains which make them go nuts, and away you go. It's not in human nature to do it, which we say is a good thing.
All right. Now, we have only 2 or 3 minutes left.
Rip off the windbag.
Time rips by, doesn't it? So is there one other story that you'd like to very briefly mention? Because there's several, right?
Let's have a look. The push for profit, even though we didn't get into it, is all about big pharma
and childbirth.
Taking over childbirth and the childbirth industry and how it's become progressively worse. And it's like if you wrote out a list of things not to do for a happy, healthy and safe birth, that's what the hospital system does. So if you are having a baby and you need to use the hospital system, have your wits about you and have people around to advocate for you. Otherwise, I can't see anything. I know of people who have recently had a really good experience, but they were strong in their stance on no childhood vaccinations for at least the first 4 years. In Japan, they don't vaccinate any babies until they're a certain number of years old, and their rate of SIDS and autism and being, needing medication for, mental stuff is incredibly low. And anyway, I don't want to get you banned on YouTube by going down that road, but
that.
The birthing industry is all for profit for big pharma, and unfortunately, most of the good doctors and most of the good nurses left rather than see themselves jabbing untested, unsafe gene therapy into the human population as part of a cull. Another article on the same issue, similar vein, is called Dark Medicine. Yeah. And this is a summary of the insane experiments conducted upon humans over the last 200 years in jails, in hospitals. We're not talking third world countries. We're talking America, Britain, Western countries, where Big Pharma has utilised its insane power to, do horrific things to babies without anaesthetics, without painkillers, and people in jail, the general public in subways. Honestly, people need to understand at the top of the pile of bastards is Big Pharma and the big chemical companies, and they have centuries of power and profit under their belt. You can literally take it back to when corporations were invented and when corporations became perpetual. Once upon a time, you set up a corporation for a project. You finished the project, the corporation was dissolved. Everybody split up, the assets and the winnings. But when corporations became perpetual and were given insane amounts of rights and responsibilities, and and humans individually were absolved because under this umbrella, that's where we need to rewind and go back to in human history. For the first level of rectification. If you invent a time travel machine, go back and knock out the guy who got corporations enshrined into our history, because it's been downhill all the way, and they've been the vehicle. They've poisoned our food supplies. We've been putting chemical poisons on our vegetables for hundreds of years. It's just that in the last 50 to 80 years, the type of poisons we've been putting on are and in next degree, more toxic for you with more side effects. So whoever's at the very, very top has been intently working on reducing the population and lowering the IQ of the population through soft metal poisoning of our vegetables, our water, our air, and our food. So your best bet to get through everything is to turn off the 6 p.m. news and grow as many of your vegetables as you can. Network with the people in your area for meat and eggs, etc. And believe me, here in Australia, the federal government is talking about rationing meat and dairy for the future. So by 2030, Australia is going to have 15-minute cities. You're going to have a steak ration and a dairy ration until they get you all onto cricket protein and other processed foods, full of all the goodies that they want into your body, which sounds pretty dystopian. But, you know, people need to wake up and choose not to go down that road. You need to wake up and talk to your neighbours, your friends and your relatives and start networking with like-minded people. I think it's too late to wake up those who are asleep. I think it's time to network with those who are awake. And
yeah, we also have to get rid of those people at the top who are trying to make all these things, whether they're in government or what. Get rid of them.
You'll never get rid of them. They're untouchable. I don't even think most of them are human, to be honest. So we might need non-human help to remove them. But, you know, at the same token, humans don't have to do what they've done. We can wake up internally and we can resist. And there is something in humans which has resisted, which has, you know, endured 1,000 years of negativity and, you know, in many cases as a type of mental and emotional slavery. I mean, yeah, we've had good patches, etc. But every time the ones at the top find a kingdom or an island or a patch, you know, which is including in this article of Nexus, this history of Khazaria. Most people think Khazaria was a Jewish kingdom which was pretty bad, etc. No, they were actually the opposite. A really amazing kingdom of together, people doing good things for everybody. But you know, you can't have that on your planet when you're one of the bastards at the top trying to, you know, spiral us this direction. You can't have little pockets of people resisting, so they have to be taken out. And not only should they be taken out, but after you've taken them out, you need to rewrite the history books so that everybody looks at them negatively rather than positively as an example of where to go. You know, they're considered, Khazaria was, you know, converted to Jews and they're all evil. And it's nothing like that whatsoever. The Jews of the world are a pawn of the Zionists. We're all a pawn of the Zionists. And, we individually have to maintain our integrity, our focus, and, you know, we need to wake up.
All right.
Now, we are waking up.
Have you got something nice and positive to finish with? 1 minute. What is really
the positive thing is none of it matters and none of it is really real. I mean, we're mortal beings of spirit who have using our free will to choose to come here and incarnate at this point in time.
Yeah.
Some of us have incarnated to be the people who die with the vaccines, and that's their gift to those of us who are struggling to make sense of it all. And our role is to not give in to anger and fear and resentment. We should be technically acknowledging everybody who has come here to die in front of us in great numbers, and that's their gift to us. So we are awakening because we are immortal beings of spirit. And there are frequencies hitting the planet which are playing into waking us up. And that's the only good thing I can really say is just hang in there, maintain your integrity, and take personal responsibility for every thought, word, and deed, and we'll get there.
And remember that wonderful 4-letter word, LOVE.
Unconditional love.
Yeah. Duncan, good to talk to you.
Thanks, Barry.
Well, we have certainly covered some ground in the last 2 weeks, and thanks to Duncan Rose, fabulous guest. Next week, something very different. Meet one of Australia's top mediums, Val Hood. She is absolutely wonderful. That's next week on Radio Out There. See you then.